Okay. Once again, welcome everyone to the Heart of Healing interview. I am Sheela Singla with Presences Here Now. And with us today is Dr. Ann Iyer, who has been practicing and teaching insight meditation for over 40 years, board certified in internal medicine and founder of an integrative medicine center in Oregon. Welcome, Aunt Ann, also my aunt. So let us begin. I'd like to begin with something you and I have talked about before, which is overstimulation and sensitivity. Going along with that, you are very sensitive to electromagnetic energy. Can you tell us more about these areas?
Sure, and let me do a test. Can everyone hear me? Give me a nod. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to each of you. And yeah, Sheila asked me some time ago whether I would be willing to do this. And it's a little ironic that that's your first question, Sheila, because I am sensitive to electromagnetic radiation. And I thought about this since you told me you would be asking, because I want to frame this within the context of mindfulness. And some of you have a background in mindful meditation, I presume, and some might not. So I want to give a little bit of a contextual framework here. So the thing that happens with mindfulness meditation is that we sincerely become more attuned to the nuances of what's going on inside of us, as well as our relationship with the world. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it will always be pleasant, but in my experience, it drives us into a deeper state of honesty with the reality of what we're experiencing at any given time.
Kathy, I can't talk right now. I'm on Zoom. Sorry, Marianne. Bye-bye. I'll call you later.
Case in point. Thank you, Alex.
Sorry.
That's really funny. So that's a perfect segue. Thank you for pointing out that when the Buddha was walking the earth, he talked a lot about distractions and how to become more focused and in a way more honest with our inner state. And I have no idea what he would say in today's world, because the level of distraction has increased so many-fold that for us to be simply in this moment with this experience and the truth of the interaction of the moment is extraordinarily challenging. So I do think that mindfulness meditation is ever more important because of exactly that. And so many people are on autopilot and going faster and faster and multitasking, doing multiple things in a row or at the same time. And to be deeply, honestly engaged with this moment is really challenging, given that. And so sometimes I laughingly say I feel like God has protected me from myself because I could easily be addicted to technology, given the many fascinating things out there, if it were not for the severe headaches, basically, that I get when I'm around technology too long or around too much of it. So again, I want to come back to the idea of mindfulness, because in my experience, it helps us be more honest with this moment as we open up more deeply into the awareness of what we are truly experiencing. So that's a simple answer. And is that enough, Sheela?
I think that's enough. Could you say a little more about honest in terms of how how our perceptions are, how central headquarters reports back what we're experiencing, or honest? What do
Yeah.
you mean by honesty with our experience?
Yes, yes. Well, that's a really excellent question. Central headquarters, of course, refers to our own mental jabber. And so we can become quite confused about what the truth is if we have a mind that's going a million miles a minute. And so, one of the central tenets of mindfulness and becoming aware of what's going on inside is noticing the nuances of the sensations of our body, telling ourselves the truth about that. This hurts, this doesn't. And also noticing what are thoughts in our mind in contrast to reality. And what I mean by that is if there's a series of thinking going on in our mind and there's nobody else around and we're having a dialogue with somebody in our brain, that's in our brain. And so most of us are seduced into thinking that what we are thinking is truth. So part of mindfulness is waking up to our own thought process, because then we have the bandwidth and the space, if you will, to stop for a minute and ask, is this true? Do I really, really know this is true? I know it's in my mind. Can I allow myself for this moment to take a deep breath and feel my body in this chair, let go of that thought, and just see how I am in this moment, right here, right here, right here. And if there's something that we're agitating about in our mind that we need to find out, then we can do a reality check. We can ask someone if we are sure that somebody's thinking this or doing that or the other, we can ask. But it's really important to notice that thoughts are thoughts, they're objects floating through the space of our mind, and that does not make them reality. So mindfulness is waking up to the nuances of our inner climate, if you will, and not taking our own thinking so seriously, but just so again, if you don't know, let me just review the tenets of Vipassana, which is that there are three main elements that the Buddha discussed: dukkha, anicca, and anatta. That means that there is pain in life. Anicca means each thing that arises will pass away. Anatta means that there is not a central self as we tend to think of it. So we've constructed a self concept, but that's very fluid. And so, in recognizing that things that arise pass away, our own thinking are simply objects that come and go in the spaciousness that contains all of us, which is the life from which we came and to which we return. Did that answer you, Sheela?
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. And on that, uh, based on this answer, I'd like to skip ahead to a later question because it just segues so nicely into it, which is that, so you and I have talked about Bon on several occasions. Now, by this open spaciousness, is that similar to
Bon. Yeah,
And can
Bon
you just
is
say a little about what Bon is?
yeah, that's an ancient Tibetan. It's thought to predate Buddhism, actually. An ancient Tibetan, I hesitate to use the word religion, but practice in which it is recognized that we can focus on spaciousness, silence, and spaciousness. And to surrender into that is a fantastic method of calming the mind and being quiet inside of ourselves long enough to come down to center. So a wonderful practice is, for example, to go outside on a clear day and just stare at the sky and let your mind open to the sky and release the thoughts like birds flying and just be present in this moment. It is extraordinary. So Bon is, they don't, in Buddhism, there's not a word, they don't discuss divine or some such, but there's a recognition of life as that which embraces and contains us. And so the word like space, emptiness, there are a lot of words that have been misconstrued sometimes in the West, but there's a wide open field which is large enough to contain all the nuances that arise without causing suffering. And we'll talk about the difference between suffering and pain. If you stub your toe, it will hurt. If you're truthful in the moment, you move away or get a different shoe or something. But suffering is the story that we agitate ourselves with, that we can't get away from because we're stuck in our own mind with ourselves. That's suffering.
Thank you. And on that note, in your book, The Heart of Healing, there's several references to cultural archetypes and myths. And this next question is again skipping ahead, but it's on the same kind of subject as your answer. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask this question, which is, now when we're suffering, that is identifying with our storylines or repeating storylines, we are kind of it seems to me we're kind of to some extent connected to the cultural archetypes and myths with our stories. And so by dropping our storylines, do we then distance ourselves from the culture?
Great question. Yeah. Well, I'd like to broaden that concept to recognize that the myths that we live with include the culture, which many times we don't even question because we're in the soup of that all the time. And to question it can, in fact, create some hardship in our lives with other people if we get too adamant about it. But we also have the myth of our personal storyline. And oftentimes those are even the more painful. And so you ask whether we distance ourselves. I think that as we, in the process of waking up, we become less invested in any given storyline, particularly the ones that drag us along by the nose across the hard rocks. As we get more truthful about, no, really this hurts, and is it really true? This thought that I keep harboring, I wouldn't use the word distance so much as we become unattached from the storyline, and we can see that also as anicca. It's a thing that comes and goes. I remember, actually, I'll share a story from my life, which I think exemplifies this, and it really set me on a certain path. I was raised as a Catholic in the Catholic Church in a completely Mormon community. And so there were major disconnects between the stories that I got in different settings. And I remember as an early teenager sitting on a hill looking over the town, reflecting that, the Catholic Church says I'm going to hell if I'm not a Catholic. And the Mormon Church says that I can't get to heaven if I'm not a Mormon. What that means is these are beliefs. And there's something bigger that is big enough to contain a variety of beliefs that don't necessarily agree. Beliefs are not necessarily the truth, big T truth, but it is what dictates people's behavior. And so to unhook from recognizing what is a belief driving us and to unhook just long enough, dare to ask the question, is this true? Do I really know that this is true? And what if I could entertain a reality where this isn't true? What would that look like? Really broadens the field.
Thank you. So this is one of the questions that is early on in the list. Recently, it's become apparent to me that each of us has this tremendous power to affect the earth and other beings through our words and actions. Do you feel potent in a similar way? And what are your thoughts on empowerment?
Well, first I want to think about that word empowerment. So this is an example of a cultural kind of framework. We're in a culture where, by and large, power, the use of power, empowerment often implies power over. And so we have an idea in our mind that what we think it should be, or this is how it should look if all was well, by our viewpoint, that somehow we can affect a change in line with our idea about the whole thing. And so I want to distinguish between the power over idea. Sometimes there's a new age notion of creating our own reality, which I want to come back to that, because in a way that's true, but often it's misconstrued to mean that we can change things to our liking, as if we know what everything should be like. And so when I think of empowerment in a way that feels healthy to me, I get in touch with an inner space that is very quiet and very real and true to this moment, and is very curious about what life is bringing in this moment. And I carry, I guess you could call it a prayer inside, that I might respond from the deepest place possible as a statement of truth to this moment. So in that regard, if I am feeling clear and true and strong and on track, my response to this moment will have an impact that is kind and might alter the trajectory of something going on. Am I making sense when I say that? Yes, no. And so I do think we all have impact on one another by the words that we say and the inner space. I mean, I think we've all had the experience of sitting next to someone who gives us the weebie-jeebies, because their energy is such that we start to feel a little bit uncomfortable being there. And in contrast, we have had the experience of being with someone with whom we feel calmer and more peaceful, and basically happier to be in the room with this person. And so that's an example of we are constantly having some impact on one another. And the empowerment that I think is most extraordinary is when we surrender in a way to that inner spaciousness from where we can be very authentic and on point with each person or each situation that's right in front of us in this moment. Because, I mean, that's really empowerment. I think about Mother Teresa showing up, each person, each person, each person. And I mean, that's an aspiration, to be able to show up without the baggage clouding my vision, such that I can see clearly what's really in front of me and not my version of it from my past patterning.
Kind of along the lines of empowerment, in the book, you, in a couple of different places, talk about or write about not casting blame outward and how each of us is profoundly innocent. Now, can you say a little bit about innocence and ignorance? That what is the difference, and especially in the context of racial justice, for example, is innocence always innocence, or is it sometimes also ignorance?
Well, that's a huge question with about 15 different pieces to it. Okay. So, by innocence, I mean, I truly believe we each act from and come from the deepest space of which we are capable in this moment. And each of us have been wounded, and that includes all the people who came before us in some manner. And so to be kind to ourselves and one another is to recognize that coming from woundedness allows a little more space for generosity of spirit. And ignorance, I mean, there are a lot of ways you could define that. I think purposeful ignorance, could you even call that, is if you know something is true and choose to turn a blind eye to it because you don't want to deal with it. Ignorance may be an authentic not knowing about something. That's different than innocence in that I truly believe inside of ourselves are kind beings who have the same longing. We each have a longing for some sense of peace, tranquility, happiness, lack of suffering. It's a simplicity of longing that we each share. And how we go about achieving that end may come through the filter of our past wounds or programs or entrainment, if you will. We're doing the best we can. If we can wake up to our own patterns so that we see, oh golly, my own thinking is hurting me here, then it frees us up to give more generosity to those around us. Each person who is suffering has some brain pattern going that's causing their own suffering. But ignorance is they might not know that. And so if it's really painful inside, so this is the reference probably to what I wrote in the book, if it's really painful inside and we can't see that our own thinking is agitating ourselves, we look for some cause of the pain, and it's going to be outside if it's not inside. Because we have a pattern of thinking that might be harmful does not mean that we're a bad person. And that's what I mean by innocence. We're trapped. We're trapped. How would we flog a dog trapped in a trap? The poor thing is howling and whining and biting because it's hurting. And so we have different variations on exactly that theme, I think.
Beautiful, thank you. Can you tell us about how some of your suffering has been transformed? What did the suffering transform into, and how did it happen?
Well, this is ongoing, Sheila. It's ongoing. I mean, I think about my life now compared to 20 or 30 years ago, and I'm astonished almost on a daily basis about how lucky and blessed and grateful I am for this wonderful life. I just to have awakened to see that my thoughts cause suffering is so enormous. And so it typically doesn't take real long if I've got an idea going about somebody or something before I stop. and say, is there something I need to do here? How can I be kind? What is just a habit of thinking? What honestly needs attention? And that's just so freeing. I feel like I have tons of friends. I just feel much safer in the world in general, even even with the news media as I think it's going on. And so the biggest, I would say the biggest change in suffering for me is not taking much of it as seriously as I used to, and not feeling driven to have to fix something. It's very freeing, actually, to just show up and see what's here.
What's your view on divinity, and do you at times feel divine?
Goddesses all, we're all women on here, right? Yes. Well, okay, so I want to talk a little bit again, because I think we're in a culture in which divinity, by and large, is often seen as outside of self and over self. And that's certainly the view I grew up with. And I no longer think that. And so I perceive that there's a marvelous life force that keeps us all going. I mean, I've attended people as they go through the dying process, and it's very clear when that life force is gone. And I don't even need to check their pulse to know that that which was animating them has left, if you will. And so I like to think life has us. We say we have life. I think life, or the divine, I use those two words interchangeably, has us. We're out picturings of one aspect of the divine impulse in the world. And so we're each equally divine in that way. And none of us are over. There's an equity here of what does that mean. So I don't think of the divine as an external. I think I'm putting myself out here on a limb a little bit. I don't know anybody's personal beliefs here, but I perceive there are non-carbon based benevolent forms available to help us. But the divine is all of us in toto. There's nothing not part of that which is the divine. Did that answer your question?
Yes. In the book, you also write about feeling like a victim in places in the book. And could you say more about that? And is there like a sense of helplessness with the victim identity or role? And what would be some other ways of that someone who sees themselves as a victim might feel?
Well, this kind of is a correlate of the earlier questions, because again, if we're a victim, we're playing a role relative to other individuals who we see as more powerful and over us. And to feel powerless is kind of on a similar ilk of feeling power over. If there's that formula going on, you're going to be in one predicament or the other, and neither one of them is very pleasant. And so again, coming back to the idea of empowerment, this is a great place to apply this principle of breathing into the sense of tranquility, the spaciousness inside, and knowing that inside we are equally divine, we're each equally responsible. We are each having the experience that our mind is presenting to us right now. And if we are feeling ourselves stuck as a victim, that's an invitation to come down into that strength position, the Dantian, for those of you, the place of strength inside, and asking ourselves, okay, sweetheart, what do I need here? I am here with and for you. I will not abandon you. I am here. What is it? What is it that's needed right here? And take responsibility for making those choices that put us back on our own feet, because the external blame is either going to create anger or fear relative to that which we see that we're blaming, no matter where we put them on the spectrum of powerful or whatever word we're using. If we've got the power out there, if we've got the view out there, then we're missing the boat about our own inner self. And that I think, the very first question you asked, the many distractions that we have going on pull us out of our own awareness of ourselves so thoroughly that we lose track even what's true about and for self as an inner being, as a person who has an inner space at all. We don't even have any idea how to access that if our brains are always going.
Beautiful. You have written and spoken previously about, and just now actually, about death and also about aging. Can you tell us about aging? You remember one particular insight you had in which an individual has a series of injuries or illnesses, and then they seem to give up on life and they're soon gone. Could you say more about that?
Again, this is a multiplex question. So let me rest with that for a minute. Yes, I've been with quite a number. In fact, I'm thinking of someone dear to me right now in my life who seems to have given up and has chosen bed as his preferred place. So, the natural end run of what we call life is death. And I see this as a continuum. I see dropping the body as just a facet of life, and that the life that we are continues. But if we are completely identified with our body as being all that we are, that can be quite frightening. So, the giving up business, I don't know what that is necessarily for each person. I'm thinking of one individual, for example, who thought that she was going to willingly die when her time came. She had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, but then was not ready at all to die until one day she was. And she just passed over like that. And I mean, every person dies in such a different way. Some truly are radiant, and it's clear in their passing that there's just a transition happening where their life is clearly continuing. It's just, they're radiant right up to and through. And others fight, and I think there's fear involved. Others have a sense of despondency and giving up, and that may be more of a state of depression. And I can't say what it is for each individual, why it is that they go into that mental framework as it comes time for them, for the body to no longer be their house, if you will. So in my view, I mean, it's so obvious. Not a single one of us are going to get off this planet in the autobus of our body. And so how we go about living our life such that we're fully here while we're here, excuse me, and then open I like to think of how again and again and again I experience little forms of death, in that something that I think is stable, in spite of all I know, changes and morphs right in front of me and disappears. And getting used to the new territory without this or that or this person is an ongoing process. And so at some point, our relationship with this world will end as we know it, as this body. And surrendering as deeply as we can again and again to today's change, today's loss, today's new adventure, which is automatic if there's loss. Letting that be so, I think, primes us for the big event, which is leaving the carbon base.
It's so fascinating. Now, in your view, you just spoke about a continuation. Did you say continue? So after death, the life is what happens to that life, or to that to the afflictions, or to the previous awareness? Does the awareness continue in your view?
I don't know. If I died before, I don't remember it quite. Actually, that's not true. But this is probably a belief, and so I want to be careful. It seems to me that there's an ongoingness of an energetic pattern that may show up again. And there are a lot of views about reincarnation or karma from the past and so on. And I don't want to pretend that I know that. But I do have a sense of an ongoingness of some awareness and life, including the energetic patterns that we had not released or cleared or worked through. And so I do think that there is an ongoingness, by whatever name you want to give that.
Thank you. Another part of the book which I found very interesting is when you write about layers of fear that we work through, layers of fear and resistance to basically feeling the fear in the bodily sensations, and then seeing what's beneath that, and then new fear and what's beneath that. And then you write that there's a hilarious sentence, and something like, let me see if I can find it. I'm going to read it. If you drop the fight, you're stripped of your illusions. You fear being exposed for what? That is what you must discover. Often at the center of all the layers of fear is a kernel of deep belief that is the most poignant and the most fearful. And then further down the paragraph you write, you will find that the kernel of fear in the middle of it all is some variation of I'm bad, or I'm not okay, or there is something wrong with me, or I can't. You will tap into some self-negation that is so primordial and basic that it is the original sin.
Wow, I wrote that, huh?
And like you said, say more about that. I mean, like you said, it's just a belief, and you feel it in the sensations, and then you see that it's not even true.
Then you're free.
There's the energy moving through you.
Yes, then you're free. then you're free. But you know, there are layers upon layers upon layers, because that which we most don't want to see, we've become very adept at not seeing. I mean, just imagine for a moment, as a counterpoint, that really and truly there's not one single thing wrong with you that needs fixing, that in this moment, exactly how you are is so deeply acceptable. Every bit of you is so deeply acceptable, and that you are loved exactly as you are. If you can close your eyes and imagine that there is, if you want to use the word, a divine being, an essence, life itself is supporting you and loving you exactly as you are. And so every little nuance that comes and goes is part of the adventure of your experience on the planet, but it is not bad. You are not bad. If we really believe that in every part of us, how might that feel, and how might we behave? How glorious would we show up in our life to the next moment, so that we can be available to the love, the person who's in front. We would be more loving, right? We would find greater acceptance of each other person if we ourselves were not trying to hide some part of ourselves because it might not be acceptable. And that does not mean, by the way, that every single person will find you acceptable, but to look at them and say, oh, they're suffering. That's a form of their suffering, is a freedom for self, to not take that personally, to know that and it doesn't mean that we don't have habits that we could let go of and be even more kind. But right inside of us, that kernel of life, that infant that is still innocent, that never goes away. And to remember that and to surrender to that depth of kindness for ourselves. Yeah, I mean, it's ongoing. It's ongoing. It's ongoing.
Beautiful, thank you. We have time for questions. Are there any questions from you all?
I have a question. What does Marianne think? Well, it's kind of a big question. What is the heart of healing? What creates healing, do you think? In body and in mind?
So yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Alex. What creates healing in body and mind? Well, what we were just talking about a moment ago, you know, the surrender to allowing this moment to be as it is and not fighting. In the Christian tradition, which I know you're a part of, there is the notion of forgiveness as being central and most important.
Mm-hmm.
And forgiveness for me means that we really do allow each event, each person, each situation to be as it is. That does not mean we don't protect ourselves. It does not mean we don't take steps to do what we have to do for our own health and well-being, but we don't harbor an inner state of violence, an inner state of resistance where we are fighting. When we notice those inner tensions, we find the places where we are causing harm to ourselves. And so healing involves a wide open space of allowing, trusting God to know what God is doing, not arguing with God's, I hesitate to use the word plan, but the events of this moment. And if we are feeling like something is off, surrendering that to the spaciousness, to God, whatever word you use, it doesn't matter. These words that we use sometimes get in the way because it has layers of meaning for different people, but there is clearly that spaciousness within which we are all contained. And that when we surrender to the events of this moment, and if there's something off, invite that spaciousness in. And then we also ask for guidance for how we, as the little individual we are in this whole thing, might show up, what words might come through us in this moment. The word surrender keeps coming up in a big way in my mind to that question. Let's surrender and not fight. Don't fight.
Mhm.
Don't try to put our opinion over God's creation. Like, let there be some trust that there is space and room for all things to work out, and that we can be safe in our role, whatever that might be. So healing is an ongoing process, as you know, because we have so many nuances, these little closets of places in our mind where we're harboring this idea or that idea. And if we really start, mindfulness meditation is so good. We start to notice what our own thinking is. We start to notice, we're feeling tense, we've got the same reaction, and just stop. What is it I'm thinking about this? What view am I holding? What belief? Whatever the phrase is that works to jiggle loose what we're holding in our mind that's holding ourselves in this contorted way that is causing suffering to ourselves and making us less clear, less able to respond in a truthful, divine way to this moment. So it's ongoing, very curious, constantly. And to drop the blame means not feeling sinful or bad about it, but continually curious. What is that going on? And be very curious so that there's room for us to tell ourselves the truth about where we're stuck. Does that make?
I think I know what you mean. There's someone in my life who I really love her, but she perpetually annoys me. There's certain things she does that just trigger me. And I keep being friends with her because she's worth it. And I know she's a good person. So I was asking myself, this goes with your curiosity. Why am I so triggered by these certain things that she does? And I realized that I want something from her.
Mm.
And she's not giving it to me. And I'm mad.
Yes.
And I don't think we should have friends because we want something from them. And to be mad when they don't give it to us. Like that's not. And realizing that, I kind of had compassion for myself and for her. Like I'm not accepting her the way she is.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
I'm curious as I hear you say that, when we want something from someone, often there's a primordial need or want that we have that is perfectly valid. And then we look to one person or situation to fulfill that need. And if they are not fulfilling it, it does not negate or make wrong the need or the want that we originally had. And so there's a kind of quivering, very vulnerable place inside that does want something. And I would go there with great curiosity and compassion and say, sweetheart, what is it you need? And then try opening that vulnerable space to the divine so that the need or the want can be met because it's valid if it's there. And so there's greater compassion, and to unhook from any given one person. A lot of us have that with our idea of a parent, for example, might not be exactly giving us what we need, but to unhook from that helps us forgive the parent as well. Anybody is forgiveness, but then come back so kind, so gentle, sweetheart. What do you need? And stay there where there's that vulnerability, and let it be an open receptivity, and see what the universe brings. Who knows how that will show up? How beautiful that will be. That'll be a surprise.
I kind of said that this morning because I was working on that this morning. My
Mm.
meditation sessions are always working on something. And I said, instead of demanding this from another human being, only ask it from God. Don't want it from another human being, because human beings, I think we all fail each other in
Mhm.
one way or another, because we're human. And we shouldn't really go, we should go to God for everything. Do you believe that?
Yes, and I think that God works through human beings, and that when we unhook from the way it has to look and the person it has to come through, but stay receptive to how it might show up, it might come through a human being. So staying receptive, giving each other a break, but staying receptive for where it might show up, because we are all connected and part of the divine. So God works through these tangible carbon-based forms all around us. Maybe not just exactly the way we demand, but if we're receptive and honest and stay truthful without demanding it of one person, it may show up as, who knows? I'd love to hear how that goes.
I know that's absolutely true, because there's sometimes people will show up in my life and say something, and I know they're not particularly wise or insightful or
But it
conscious,
was exactly
but
what
it
you
was
would.
exactly what I needed to hear. And
Yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
saying thank you, but I know they wouldn't even know what I was thanking them for.
Try it. You might be surprised. Okay. Eddie, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you. Any other questions, Margaret? Jane?
I'd like to ask a question. I have found that in my meditation practice, my sitting practice, that it is deep and spacious and meaningful and very restful. And then I have found now that taking the practice out of the meditation cushion is obviously a whole different thing. And I understand what you were saying about being kind and paying attention and being mindful and bringing yourself back in and feeling that spaciousness with the moment. And I know that I can tell that if I'm tired, I can't do that well, or if I'm not taking my care of myself, or those kinds of things. But I'm trying to figure out so many times I can feel that wisdom in the back of my body, that I can, when I'm talking to someone, and I can feel that openness that you're talking about, like with the clouds. But how to remember when I'm not in that, to be in that again, to what kind of cues or things. I wondered if you had any feedback of better ways to make that happen more often, or if that's just a process of just practice and it will get easier.
Yeah, so good to see you, by the way. Well, as you were talking, Jane, I was thinking about in breath, out breath, letting that be, in breath, out breath, and knowing that we are nourished, and then it moves through us, then we flush the toilet. And we are carbon-based forms, and so I myself am not a bubble of light floating around with no with no carbon-based nuances. And so I think that, and so I can't speak to that as a possibility because I know I'm not there. But I notice that when I catch myself in a tightness, that moment is a little mini waking up, and it happens again and again and again. I've also noticed that the longer I've done this, the more sensitive I am to those around me. And so I also notice how I need to, just like I don't take my own thoughts personally as much, I can't take the vibes or the cultural currents personally either. It's almost like as we open and expand our awareness, we feel more, not less. And so Sheela mentioned something about affecting the world around us, but we do that through the fabric of our own being in each moment. And so I don't know what it's like to be awake in every moment, but I do notice how it keeps coming back again and again. And the forgiveness, like we were talking with Alexa, forgiving each moment as it shows up as a tension or as a cross current, or one more hassle, or it's like, okay, what is this? Just very still, spacious. Let that come to the surface and embrace that too. But it's ongoing, and each time it comes up, there's a quiver of discomfort. Makes me think about Eckhart Tolle, who shared that he was getting ready for a talk and he was backstage, and the announcement went on, 5 minutes to showtime. And he tensed up. It's like, showtime? And this is Eckhart Tolle. I didn't know he got tense, but he did. And he noticed it. And then he noticed he was tense and he let it go. And so I don't think that we stop feeling sensations or the nuances of the crazy parts of life. I think about Jesus Christ on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? I mean, it seems to me like even these great masters that we admire right up to the end have an interaction with life that is not necessarily comfortable. And so to expect anything different from ourselves, so again, cutting ourselves a lot of slack for the latest iteration of what life is giving us to open up to. I'm not qualified to know if that ever ends, because I certainly haven't reached the end of challenges.
Nor have I. Thank you.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you. I think, gosh, we're at the end, Sheela. Are we at the end of our
We are
time?
at the end, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us here. And Aunt Marianne, thank you so much. It's just so lovely. Thank you. Hope to see you all again. Have a nice
Yes.
evening.
You
Bye-bye.
Thank
too.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.